For all surfers, beginner to advanced, the paddle-in is an extremely important aspect of surfing. Especially in the early stages of one's surfing journey, it can be one of the biggest barriers to surfing progression, as components of the paddle-in, such as paddle technique, chest position, entry speed and board angle, will hinder the waves you're able to catch and your setup as well. Today, we have a question from our viewer Ryan, who was asked about where to lay on the board when paddling for a wave, as the position can vary from time to time. In this video, we'll go through all of these points, so you can carry these through to your own surfing and eliminate the paddle-in as a barrier to your surfing progression. If you like what we're doing here, feel free to give us a follow. This is tip time, now let's get into it. Alright guys, welcome back to another segment of Tip Time, where we take a deep dive into your questions. Once again, thanks very much Ryan for the question today. It'll be good to delve into. And if you have any questions for the next week's Tip Time, we do these weekly, so please leave them in the comments below. Okay, so if we touch on that first point with regards to the chest position, the chest position is really important, and it's a really important thing to make sure we get right when we're doing the paddle-in. Of course, if we're too far forwards when we shouldn't be, we're going to nosedive, and conversely, if we're too far backwards, we're actually going to put a little bit too much weight onto the tail, which, as we know, creates drag and really slows the board down, pushes too much water, so it's really difficult to get our entry speed, which is something we'll speak about in a little bit. Now, how do we find the right spot, and what does that look like? Our position on the board should have a really nice feeling to it when we're in the right spot. I call this the sweet spot, and yeah, essentially this is where we're going to pick up or maximize our speed when we're paddling. But how do we figure out where this is? The first thing that I like to look at, apart from how it feels when you're paddling and when you're surfing, is actually looking at how the board is placed on the water when you're not on it. What you'll probably see is that there'll be a little bit of lift between the water and the board at the nose and at the tail. If you've got a heavily rocketed board, there'll be more distance between the nose and the tail and the surface of the water. And if it's a flatter board, it's going to have less of that distance between the surface of the water and the board. But have a look and see what the board looks like naturally without you on it. And then what you can do is you can go onto the board and try and find this position. Now, it can be a little bit tricky to find this exact position by yourself, because obviously we can't see exactly our position or where we are on the board or how much lift there is. So what I like to do is, if you're surfing with someone, if you've got a friend you're surfing with, get them to have a look at the board, firstly when you're not on it, and just have a look and see what it's like when it's flat on the water, and then pop on the board, get them to give you feedback as to the positioning and how the board looks, whether there's more lift on the nose, which will happen when you're actually too far back. We'll be placing more weight onto the tail, and so that nose will lift up. And then, or if there's not enough lift at the nose, which is where you're going to be too far forwards, and there's not going to be the same distance between the surface of the water and the nose of the board as to when you weren't on it. So that'd be the first couple of things that I'd be looking for. Now, the second thing with regards to chest position, once we've found that sweet spot, is what kind of wave that we're paddling into. Now, if that wave is going to be really steep, a lot of the time we can correctly have a little bit of apprehension paddling into it and being too far forwards. And this is something that I see a lot of. So what we can do is move ourselves back towards the tail a little bit. Now, quite often I think that the error here is that we move far too much towards the tail. And so we might move, half a foot towards the tail. And unfortunately, this is too much. If I'm moving forwards or backwards with regards to my chest position up and down the board, depending on the steepness of the wave, it's really subtle. It's not a lot. So it might be a couple of inches here and there, but definitely nothing too significant. So again, I'd maybe move 1-2 inches further back if the wave is steep. And on the other hand, if there's a wave that's fairly flat and we have to paddle lots and really hard to get into it, what we might want to do in that instance is push ourselves maybe 1 to 2 inches further forward. Again, if we do this too much, we can definitely go too far in the other direction and go towards our nose diving, where we've got too much weight forward. So make sure that it's only a little bit. Now, the other tricky thing here is identifying what are the waves that we need to move further back for and then further forwards for. And this is a lot of trial and error. If we can make sure that we're, again, sliding back a little bit for our steep waves, sliding forwards a little bit for our fatter waves, so the waves that aren't so steep, I think that's a really good place to start. This leads into the next part, which is entry speed. If we don't have the chest position correct to begin with, our entry speed will be affected. So let's get into that now. So entry speed, or the speed that we carry in from paddling into a wave, is a really, really important part of surfing. If we think about the number one problem here, it would probably be that we're not paddling fast enough into a wave. And so when we're paddling into the wave, we don't have that speed that then can be used to generate the momentum once the wave lifts us up and comes underneath us. And so we're going a little bit too slowly. The second biggest problem that I see is people not actually paddling or accelerating their paddle and leaning into that paddle when they need to. And this has a lot to do with, firstly, apprehension with nosediving, which leads into a little bit of what we were speaking about before with that chest position. So to use an example here, I like to think that we've got a steep wave coming behind us. If we've got a steep wave coming, quite often what will happen, if we don't know to shift our weight backwards or our chest backwards, is we're going to paddle as we normally do. And as a safety mechanism, what we'll often do as that wave starts to lift us up, we're actually going to back off, arch that chest up, and then we're going to lose a fair bit of that entry speed or that momentum that we had carrying through the paddling that we were already doing. So you can think of the fact that we're actually wiping off speed as we lift our chest up to stop ourselves from nosediving. Now, the reason that this is so important is this is a really crucial part of our paddle into a wave. And this is actually where we need to drive momentum and accelerate ourselves down the wave. What happens if we don't do this and we actually back our paddling off at this crucial period where the wave starts to lift us up, is we're going to back off our weight, we're going to rise all the way to the top of the wave, and this is the classic thing that I see, is where at this point people then start to paddle really, really hard, but they're already at the top of the wave and they've missed that crucial period down the bottom or the bottom curve where they should be leaning into that paddle. Now, to correct this, bringing ourselves and bringing our chest backwards is a fantastic way to go. So when we bring our chest backwards, we're less likely to nosedive and might feel a bit more comfortable to actually accelerate our paddle speed and push our chest into the board in order to drive that momentum to get ourselves really, really quickly onto the wave. You'll see a couple of these examples that I use here. I actually don't paddle a whole lot for the wave. I don't have a lot of speed going before the wave gets to me. But what I do is I actually really push that chest down and accelerate my paddle speed on that bottom curve of the wave, or when the wave starts to lift me up. And therefore, I'm able to generate that momentum really nicely and effectively to build into the wave. Of course, this can become a problem if we're pushing hard and accelerating that paddle and we're too far forwards. We can, of course, nosedive, and that's something that is very natural to want to steer away from. Two things that I would say to try for this is make sure if we're practicing paddling into steeper waves, really try and make sure that we are moving a couple of inches back towards the tail. This is going to give you a nice safety reserve so that you can really accentuate that paddle and lean that chest forwards into the board as that wave just begins to lift us up. Now, the other thing that's really important that I wanted to cover here is, you'll see with a few of my videos, is that there's actually a little bit of water flicking up and over the nose as I'm paddling into waves. This is usually the first sign where I see people lift that chest up in hesitation, and fairly understandable because, of course, we don't want to nosedive. But it is normal to get some level of water flicking up over the nose, and I'll show a couple of examples of that here. But what we do need to have a good gauge of is whether the board is just planing nicely along the surface of the water, and so inevitably we're going to get some water flicking over the top, or whether we are actually nosediving. Because again, this is a really important thing. If we can identify when we're just, when we've got the board planing nice and flat over the water, which is when it's gonna be going at its fastest, this is when we need to accelerate and push into that paddle. If we're gonna nosedive though, that's when we need to try and lean back. So a couple of things to keep in mind there, but hopefully it helps to clarify some of that for you as well. Now, the other big thing that I do see is the board angle. I see a lot of the time, if the wave is steep, that we need to make sure that the board's on a big angle. Now, this can be the case, but it also brings a lot of problems with it as well if we're not doing it correctly. The reason being, if you think that the wave is trying to take us directly in towards the beach, as we steer that board, or as we turn that board and put it on more of an angle when we're paddling into the wave, we're essentially wiping away speed from the direction that that wave is wanting to send us. And so what we need to do here is we actually need to paddle even harder. So we need to paddle really, really hard, Now, we could end up too far on the shoulder, so we need to time that paddle really nicely as well. What I generally advocate for is we can do a little bit of a direction change or put a bit of angle on there, but you definitely don't want to have yourself anywhere near parallel or facing the same direction as where that wave is going, because the amount of paddle speed we're going to have to generate to get onto that wave effectively is going to be really tricky. It's something you can do later down the line. There's an example I have here in the video where I am fairly angled across the wave. This is because I want to get down the line, but if you don't need to get down the line super quickly, I'd say bring yourself so that the board is facing more so towards the beach, and you'll have some good success with that. So obviously you're going to really need to lean into your paddles if you are angling your board, and so that's something to consider, but make sure that you're no more than maybe a 20-degree angle for most situations and most waves when you're paddling into a wave, so that you've got as much speed as you need in the same direction as the wave is going, so that you can actually get onto your wave. Now, as I spoke about at the start of the video, there's a bunch of stuff here that we could go into more depth with, and I think that's probably worth doing in another edit of tip time. Things like your entry speed / your paddle speed, and also timing of your paddle, which we didn't really get into. I think all of these are really important components, but give what we've spoken about today a go, and I'd like to see how that's feeling for you. If you have any questions, queries, or anything like that after you've been trying this, please leave them in the comments below. I'd be really happy to have a bit of a chat about those with you. And if you feel like you need further assistance, of course, we've got some online coaching that we do for you guys as well. So again, please feel free to reach out, and I'd be happy to have a chat about some of that with you. But I think that's where we'll leave it today. I hope you got a little bit out of it, and that you're able to apply this to your own surfing. I know it's a really tricky aspect of surfing, especially in the early phases, and it can be something that once we really get a good handle of, it moves us through to the next stages of our surfing really nicely, because we're able to catch more waves that are going to challenge us and actually allow us the opportunities to develop our surfing in these other areas. So I hope you have fun with it all, and it'll be great to hear how everything's going with it. We'll leave that there today. We've got the Sunday glide coming up this Sunday as usual, and there'll be another edited tip time coming up in a week's time. But other than that, hope you're getting waves, and we'll catch you soon.